So, good evening, you guys. I'm reviewing AEW Dynamite, the go home show to AEW All In, their biggest show of the year. And I felt like this show, for the most part, just had matches, and they were just like, hinting or foreshadowing matches that are happening on the card. But there was nothing that overly excited me for the All In show, but I'm still, going. Like, I'm actually, at home right now. In 4 hours, I got to go to the airport in Hartford, fly to Chicago, and then fly to Dallas. So I'm going to be at All In, and I'm really, really freaking excited for it. But I do want to talk about the show and talk about what I liked and didn't like. And the first thing that happened was Mercedes and Tony were talking in the ring. There was a thing where Toni Storm was backstage. She gets criticized for being backstage. She makes a joke about it. And then they go to the ring. And Mercedes was talking about being 7 belts Monet. And Toni Storm says things like, you are, save the promotive bullshit for your ring entrance, Monet. You treat me like an underdog. You're also a cock-faced fraud. Your belts are something to hide behind. What the hell are you afraid of? Mercedes says, I'm better than you, success, class, and I've made the devil my bitch. When I get booed by these people, it makes me stronger. I am the one-woman revolution. So, you're kind of seeing, Toni Storm alluding to the fact that Mercedes Moné has some insecurities, and then you're also having Mercedes being really full of herself, like she's just like a snob. And then Toni Storm says, Tony, she says, to Mercedes, legacy doesn't exist. We all die. You fear an ordinary life, and I fear an ordinary death. You will go down as the woman who can't beat the big one. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense what they're saying. All I can kind of tell you is that it really seems like, Toni Storm feels that Mercedes has insecurities, that Mercedes is looking at her as ultimately like, oh, well, you know what? I don't see you as a challenger. I don't see you as, an opponent. I don't care about the match that we're having. I care about winning the title. So, like, Mercedes obsessed with materialism. I think that's really the theme. But the thing about ordinary life and ordinary death, that's very philosophical, but they didn't say it in a way that makes a lot of sense or that would make sense to the audience, and I think that, it's kind of paradoxical in a way because, having a life that people remember you for and having, like, a death that people remember you for because, when people die, people talk about them at their funerals, so it's almost the same thing, I think that both of them are going to have legacies, and if this is a battle of does a legacy really matter, or legacy doesn't matter in the big picture because everybody dies, and decades and millennia from now you're not going to be remembered really, so I kind of think that it doesn't make any sense. I really think that they said, well, Mercedes just looks at every opponent as a title, or maybe she's kind of compulsive about winning titles, like somebody who maybe just thinks like she's going to win things easily, maybe a little lazy or overlooks people. If they kind of did more of that dynamic, it would be a more like a thematic story about, winning championships isn't everything. When you want to win something, you have to really fight for it, even if it is, collecting titles. Really, you have to fight for every title, or you have to be, when you're doing when you have 2 belts, you got to do twice the work. So when you have 7 belts, you have to do 7 times the work, really. And Mercedes hasn't done that. She's been like a queen on her throne. So they kind of set up this dynamic of like a snob versus somebody who values her championship reign. Then that would be a better dynamic, but they don't communicate that. And then Toni Storm ends it by taking her hat and then just doing some cowgirl dancing and everything like that. So again, it's a little too they just can't stop the stupidity. They can't make it not make any. It doesn't make that much clear sense to an audience really. So I'm not really a fan of when people do things and they don't make sense really. I remember I had a professor in college that would pound his table and be like, make some fucking sense, Byron, make some fucking sense. They're speaking in a way that's trying to sound sophisticated, but it just doesn't come off as making sense. The next match was the opening match with Bandito and Brody King versus Konosuke Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher. Protoshita is a stupid name. They just should call them Kyle Fletcher and Takeshita, or they should say the Don Callis family. That's just more to the point. Bandito and Brody King do a double team move on Kyle Fletcher. Bandito, Brody King, and Takeshita are announced for the Casino Gauntlet match. The Super Card of Honor graphic, I'm happy to see there. They mentioned Super Card of Honor many times through the show. I'm very proud of that. I wish they did a trailer, and showed it 1 or 2 times to kind of make sure it doesn't come off as a small text on the bottom of the screen. They should have done a little bit more, but I'm happy that they at least have some form of promotion. Bandito does a second rope dive. Takeshita does a top rope dive. Brody King does a second rope dive. Bandito does a frog splash. Fletcher does a running kick to Brody King. Bandito does a moonsault off the top rope on the Kyle Fletcher. Takeshita hits a raging fire on Bandito. So I was happy with this match because a lot of the bad guys won tonight, and that's actually really, really good because you can't just make it predictable. It can't be good guys winning every single time and then on pay-per-view because it's almost like how are they threatening, really? You gotta just have unpredictability. So Takeshita getting a pinfall here, and he got a pinfall last week, I believe. So that's good storytelling. It's announced that there's a fatal 3-way for the tag team titles, but FTR might make it a fatal 4-way, and I'm happy with that because FTR and the Outrunners have been feuding a lot. So wouldn't it make sense for that whoever wins that to face the Hurt to be in that fatal 4-way? That would make a lot of sense. So the next match was Ricochet versus Blake Christian. Why should I care about Blake Christian? He always lose, and he's mad that the Gates of Agony beat down his friend, I believe Lee Moriarty. So that makes no sense at all, really. Are you turned Blake Christian babyface now? So the booking of Blake Christian has been really, really freaking terrible. It's announced that Ricochet is going to be in the Casino Gauntlet match. There's a second rope dive by Blake Christian. Ricochet does a Spanish fly. Blake Christian does a springboard 450. Ricochet. And then also there's some spots where the Gates of Agony tried to help Ricochet. I was saying to myself, you don't need that because that's been an issue with AEW a lot, is that if you're in a faction, they help you win by cheating. If you do that all the time, you don't look like you have a strong champion. Like I always say, remember Bobby Roode in TNA Wrestling? What happened with Bobby Roode? That every championship match that he won, he always cheated, and that's not good for a villain champion. If they have a faction and they're always cheating, then they don't look like that good of a champion because they always rely on cheating. You have to have matches where people actually win without using their faction. So it's repetitive, but I also will say that maybe if Jon Moxley continues his title run, he shouldn't be doing that, but it works more for Ricochet because Ricochet is kind of like an asshole, really. So I think Ricochet should be the one who has interference. Nobody else who has a faction, their faction shouldn't interfere. But I would give people credit because the Don Callis family, for the most part, is a faction where they don't have a lot of interference. But they need to stop having factions interfere or pick and choose who it works for. Maybe the Moxley faction it doesn't work for, but somebody like Ricochet it works for. But I'm also happy that Gates of Agony are getting a push because, they not sit around. They really give a shit. They just don't have good direction. So, let's see if this thing with Ricochet works, So they can be trios champions or tag team champions one day. So, they showed a promo for Omega and Okada, and I agree with a lot of people that this is bullshit because Omega and Okada they're having one of the biggest matches tonight. This is supposed to be a dream match. This is almost like Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, really. Lesser version of that, So it's like AJ Styles and Bryan Danielson or something like that. Really, they should have been on the show. They should have had the same passion in their words, not in a backstage promo. So that was definitely, anticlimactic, really. And it's also just, it's just not good. They should both be there. And if Okada can't speak English or communicate that well, he shouldn't be doing American professional wrestling because You have to know how to convey with an audience, really, and he's been here for over a year, and he's been paid, I think he's been paid 3 billion yen. He can clearly learn how to communicate with the American audience, and I think that maybe this promo is trying to hide his weaknesses, but you have to know how to, if you're in such a big match, one of the big three matches of the night for All In, you have to know how to overcome your weaknesses, and apparently he's not like that, and he's so far deep in AEW politics that he's not going to work on that weakness. The next thing was Mark Briscoe and MJF. They have a talk. So MJF does his dumb comedy and insulting. He also does like the hoedown type of dance. So it's just like what I've said about MJF. Why it'll be a bad thing if he wins the Casino Gauntlet, because it seems like, if he does become champion, there would be a concern that he would go to stupid ass comedy, and we can't have that as a champion. You can't have a person like that as a champion anymore, because we're a little sick of the stupid ass 48-hour film project type of comedy. Like, stop being fucking silly. Mark Briscoe says stuff like, "I'm proud of everything I worked for. I worked hard for everything. You're bankrupt, Max, because you're morally bankrupt. You have no soul." And then the last line was MJF saying, "You know what? Your brother's rolling in your grave. You're nothing more than a joke. If your brother was here, he would say that you should have died in the car crash, not him." So Mark Briscoe beats down MJF. It's the same type of MJF stuff where he hits below the belt. It's predictable because we know this is how MJF does. He hits below the belt. He says something taboo. But if you do it all the time, really, or you don't change it up, it just becomes predictable. And then the Hurt Syndicate get nerfed tonight. So what happens is they get ambushed by Jet Speed, and they take a beating from them. So this definitely hurt the Hurt Syndicate a lot, really. Imagine if Bobby Lashley was in TNA Wrestling and you had Shark Boy and Eric Young and Amazing Red all like beat his ass, really. That's just a bad look for them. But they kind of been built up as super monsters, really. So what I would have done was I would have actually had, Speedball Mike Bailey's theme play, and then you see FTR run down and beat down the Hurt Syndicate. Then you see Christian Cage and Nick Wayne come down, and then you see Speedball Mike Bailey do that. Like, that would be the way to do it, just surprise people to make something unpredictable. Then they wouldn't feel as nerfed. But you don't have two cruiserweight people beat down, a person like Bobby Lashley who can lift over 500 pounds, So they got nerfed, and that's not good. So they had a fatal four-way match for who's going to come in second for the women's Casino Gauntlet match. And then, Aminai does a top rope ring post dive. Megan Bayne does a vertical suplex. Megan Bayne does a top rope dive. Megan Bayne throws somebody out of the ring, and then she does a dive. Megan Bayne wins with a running powerbomb on Queen Aminata. And then backstage you had the Toxic Spider get ambushed by Aminata. So that's good, because you have to be like, okay, we're lacking women's feuds. So they have like kind of a feud or a match against each other after All In. That's what you need to do, really. So I appreciate this epilogue. And it's bad because then you have Mark Briscoe come out and he's talking like a Kid Rock Dirty South version of Dusty Rhodes, or a Boomhauer version of Kid Rock. And I'm like, what would happen if he acted like this during the promo that he gave against MJF, really? So the promo was okay, the talk was okay, it could have been way better, but if he had this energy and this fire, and he spoke like this at the end of the promo, I think then he would have gotten over in a big way, really. So when he has this much energy and this much fire, why doesn't he do this out in the fucking ring? If he did that, he would be a megastar. And as I said, he's still, in my opinion, he's still salvageable, but he needs to kind of pick and choose his moments. So he picked the wrong moment to have this much fire and this much energy. Don't do that behind the scenes. Do that in the fucking ring, Mark. And then you have Samoa Joe versus Wheeler Yuta, the penultimate match. I did not watch this. I just didn't give a shit, because, why would I want to watch this? Because Wheeler Yuta is kind of like, he reminds me of Corey Delaney, if I'm saying it's Connor Delaney. He was a wrestler in WWE, really. So it's like, he's kind of a dorky joke wrestler, So it's almost like, why should I really care about this guy facing a guy who's been a former champion and everything like that? Again, if you watch TNA wrestling, it'll be just like if you had Shark Boy versus Samoa Joe, really, or if you had one of those rappers, that rapper that helped out John Cena, that rapper who helped out John Cena during his match at WrestleMania. What would happen if he had a match with Cody Rhodes? It's Will Yuta is like Will Yuta. Like I said, he's a good wrestler. We actually had a confrontation. He kicked my ass. I might talk about that story a little bit later. And the other thing is, the other thing about that is that like as I said, why should I have a why should I care about this? Why should I care about this match? Because who's going to win. You're having a small guy versus a big guy. Like I said, it's like Orange Cassidy versus Brian Cage, or Orange Cassidy versus AEW champion Samoa Joe. So you just don't waste my time with this. It did nothing. Like I said, you could have set up Samoa Joe versus Gabe Kidd, or Samoa Joe versus and the Ops versus the Death Riders. Or you could have done Powerhouse Hobbs versus Gabe Kidd. So there's a lot of things you could have set up. If they had Joseph Freeman on the microphone saying, okay, it's going to be 1-on-1, you versus me at All In, I'm Gabe Kidd or whatever, then that's what you need to do. So it's unfortunate that that they're not doing that. Before I continue, I need to talk about something that I really think that one concern with AEW All In is that I think that they're saving a lot of interference. So I think what they're trying to do is say the Ops and the Death Riders are not going to have a match because they're going to be involved in the interference. And then also they're saving a lot of wrestlers for the Casino Gauntlet match. So I think that you have like Ricochet and other people who could have great matches, singles matches and whatever really. But they're putting a little bit too much time in the Casino Gauntlet match. Like I think they're almost being like, okay, well, you do that one and done really, when there should be some wrestlers that have like double matches really. But I think that what they're doing is they're putting so many people in the Casino Gauntlet match that they're gonna be like, oh well, then it's a good show because you're Ricochet in this, not Ricochet in that match, or oh well, the Ops versus the Death Riders. Oh well, we're just not gonna like do that. We're not gonna do that until we're not gonna do that. We're just gonna say for the Texas Death Match and the interference really. When you could just do both, that would be better. The main event match was Hangman, Ospreay, Hobbs, Shibata, Young Bucks, Moxley, and Claudio. Again, I wasn't really interested in this match. With WWE and AEW, you kind of see it's the typical type of the bad guys win. So it kind of tells you that the good guys are going to win at the pay-per-view because they usually do that in reverse. At the end of it, Swerve Strickland uses a tractor. If I use the word, he uses a bulldozer. He uses the bulldozer claw to destroy the Young Bucks car, limousine. And like I said, it was shocking, but it's nothing like Hangman burning down Swerve's house. So, I mean, it was a cool visual, but it wasn't something like, changing. And it also kind of came off as comedic, really, because obviously, it's ridiculous. And then you're not like approaching the Young Bucks by drinking coffee, and then Swerve does a Swerve stomp on them. So it doesn't come off like, oh, these assholes are paying right now. It does come off more like, well, we're gonna. It's almost like a high school. It's almost like a senior in high school prank war or college prank war type of thing, really. So overall, like I said, the show really did not elevate my excitement for All In, but it was still, enjoyable at some parts. It went by very quickly. This is not treated like the WrestleMania of the summer. I think this is treated like, maybe a pay-per-view. This is treated like maybe like a bigger pay-per-view deal, but not like a WrestleMania level. And AEW's kind of failed with that. I don't feel that this is compelling. I also feel that because they were stupid enough to do a bunch of back 4-hour shows, this should have been a 3-hour. This should have been 3 hours, and then also Grand Slam Mexico should have been 3 hours. just to build things. And this should have had a lot more like stories and compelling narratives. Really, I think that they didn't really do enough to make it look like you want to see John Moxley, like get killed or whatever, and you didn't do enough to kind of in anything else really. Like Tony Starr and Mercedes, they still have the comedy really. So I don't really think that it. I think that there's gonna be more people going to All In. Obviously, people get excited for events really, but this show did not hook you. It did not do the exact same hook as All Out last year when Hangman burned down Swerve's house. So that was missing, and that's unacceptable really. So it was definitely like a D- show to me. You had the matches. It was mostly just filler. Let's get to All In and let's put everything in there really. But it wasn't a show that made me more excited for it. It just made me feel the same way for it. So that's all I have to say really. And I'm not anti-AEW. Like, as I said, I've gone to over 50 shows. I have a streak that ever since All Out 2023, I've been to every AEW pay-per-view. So, I have almost like a 2.5-year record. It's going to be like a 2-year record because I'm going to go to Forbidden Door in London, then I'm going to go to All Out in Canada. So it's going to be like a 2-year record of going to all these shows. So everything I say is just constructive criticism. So that's all I have to say about the show. So it's like, as I said, it's a lackluster build. They could be building this a lot better, but they're not doing that, and that's really unfortunate.